Algebra 1, we're on practice final number 2, which starts with chapter 5. This video will just take you through number 28 for the first day of review. The other day of review will be tomorrow, and then we'll take a test in one big sitting the following class day. So 1, 2, 3, we're graphing, but this is before we were using graph paper. We were just graphing pieces of the number line. So what we were doing is we would put down the number that I gave you with some kind of a dot that we might or might not fill in. For number 1 with the 2, since there's an equals, we fill it in. For number 2 without the equals, we don't fill it in. For number 3, since it has an equals, we do fill it in. And then sometimes we made some motion off of this as well. If it was just an equal to, this is just the graph, that's it. If it was a greater than, like number 2, we would go to the right. If it was a less than, like number 3, we would draw an arrow to the left to describe a piece of the number line. 4 is just, when we start to solve inequalities, it's just like solving equations. You do the opposite, you do the same to both sides. The only difference is that the lesses and graders would sometimes turn. They turned if there were a multiplying or dividing number with the variable. If there's not a negative number with the variable, multiplying or dividing, the sign will stay, but otherwise we'll need to do some turning. So something like 6, we see the add 6, we're going to look to subtract 6 to eliminate. Subtract 6 there, x is alone, less remains, 4 is there. Your answer needs not to just have a number, but it needs the variable, the symbol, and the number, because as I just described, sometimes those symbols are going to change. So the variable and the symbol need to be part of these answers from 4 down. 5, we're going to get our first term. The less will turn to be a greater because we need to divide by negative 4. When you divide by negative 4, that'll turn the sign. If you don't have the answer key located, it should have come to you by email by now. So check that out and look to follow along with the answer. For 6, the less again turns into a greater because we're multiplying by a negative. When you multiply by negative 2, that sign is going to turn into being a greater. 7, you have choices, and we had this same choice, the other review packet a couple times. You could distribute the 16. I'm going to choose to divide 16 into 48 because it goes evenly 3 times. Then do an opposite. Subtracting a 4 will create a negative 1. Keep the less and keep the x as part of the answer. For 8, we need to eliminate a variable when there's 1 on each side. I'm going to choose to eliminate the 5x, eliminating a positive always by subtracting, because subtracting 5 helps me stay positive. Then do opposites. Subtracting 9 to get rid of this changes 8 to negative 1, and then we'll divide by 2. The answer would have a negative half in it. This sign will not turn. Even though there was a negative around, it has to be a negative with the variable, and that never happened. So x is there, greater is still there, and then that's the answer at the end. For 9, we have a lot of distributing to do. 16x plus 48, and 8x plus 16, 64. You can't shortcut this by dividing 16 into 64 because the other stuff like the 8 is messing up that trick. Combine like terms, we get 24x from those, 64 from the numbers. Opposites will subtract 64 to get 0. And when you divide, it's just stuck on 0. X is less than 0. For 10, we're doing opposites, but instead of 2 sides, there's 3. This is called a compound inequality. So we're going to add 2 to eliminate that. That makes you add 2, though, not only to the 18, but also to the 8. So we'd have 10, a 5x, and a 20. Then everything has to divide by 5s, and that'll get you the answer that I have written on my key. 11's a different kind of compound inequality with the word or. You just do this problem on its own, and you keep the word or alive. Don't forget to write the word or in wherever your answer is. So we would add 23 to get a 15. divide by the 10 to get 1.5 or 3/2 or 1.5 or whatever you prefer there. Over here we'd add 18s, so 5x less than a -9. Dividing by 5 does not turn that sign. Even though there is a negative, it has to be a negative with the variable to do the turn. 12, 13, 14 is 3 different kinds of problems that you have to create like a double problem. Anytime you see absolute value bars, you have to make a double problem out of it. What kind of problem you make depends on what sign there is, greater, less, or equal. If there's an equal sign, copy what's in the bars twice, unchanged. 4x plus 6 is here, make it twice. For one problem equal 18, for the other problem equal -18. Then do your opposites. Subtract 6 and divide 4. For this problem, subtract 6 and divide 4. And we get those two answers for the blank. For a greater problem, we also copy what's in the bars twice. Greater than the 5 on one problem, but a less than -5 on the other. And you have to remember to put the word "or" in it. And then do opposites. Subtract 5. On this one, we'll subtract 5. And all of that is the answer, and you need to have the word "or" in it. For a less than question, we only need to copy what I give you once, but in the middle of 2 less than signs. I used to call this a less than sandwich. There's a 3 in this problem, so I'm going to do 3 at the upper end, but the change of a sign, the opposite of that, -3 at the lower end. To get to x alone, I would need to add 4, not just to 3, but also to -3, and all of that is the answer. 15, we're doing story problems, so we're 150 pounds per kid, but we don't know how many kids there are. So the total weight in the elevator would be 150 times x. The elevator limit is no more than 1,700 pounds, which means we'd like to stay less than it, but it would even be okay if we equal that. So we want that symbol. If you do that, you get half the points for that question. If you get the x alone, I'd use a calculator. It's going to be 11 point something. It doesn't matter what the something is. To not make the elevator crash, you're always going to have to round that down to be 11 students. For 16, we're taking tests. So we have 4 tests so far, but there's a mystery test. So what we want to do is add up all those tests, but also add in that mystery test that we'll call x. We're doing the average, so that would make us divide by 5, because there were 5 tests, 4 originals plus the mystery test. And we want the average to be greater than 90. You write that down, I'll give you half the points for that question just for creating the problem. To solve it, since it's dividing, you'd want to multiply. So 90 times 5 is 450. You'd want to add all those numbers up, which will be 356. And then you do the opposite by subtracting 356 to get the x alone. X has to be greater than 94. I ask you for the lowest grade that can make that true. So if you need to be over a 94, but just barely to be the lowest possible grade, I could go with 95. I could go with 94.5 because I do half points on my tests. So pick one of those. 17, I think a picture is helpful. It says that we're 5 more than the other. So call something x, call the other one x plus 5. For a rectangle, these sides would each have a match. And I'm asking you to find the perimeter. The perimeter adds these all up. So if we add those all up, all of the x's have 1s. There'd be a 4x plus 10. And I say the perimeter is more than, so greater than 51. Do some opposites. Subtract the 10. Divide the 4. It's 10 point something. But we have to be greater than that. So regardless of what this is, to be greater than 10 point something, this time we're going to have to round it up. Last time it was less, so we had to round it down. This time's greater, so we have to round it up. We get 11 for this side, and then the other side that's 5 more would be 16. Then we get into some easier stuff, I think. Chapter 5 seemed harder than Chapter 6, seems to me. Chapter 6, for 18, you copy the C, it's called the base. The bases are the numbers that go to powers, and we just add the powers. So add the powers up to 7. For 19, 5 and 8 are called coefficients, just multiply them to 40, and then add the powers. The x has an invisible 1 on the one piece, so 1 plus 5 makes a 6. The y has a 6 because it has no friends to multiply with. The z stays at 2 because it had no friends either. 20, we're copying the x for the base, and then we're subtracting the powers to get a 6. 21, we would divide 9 and 12 if we could, but it won't evenly, so reduce it like a fraction to be 3/4. For the x's, subtract powers, 2 minus 7 is negative 5. For the y's, subtract powers, and they're completely gone, there's nothing there. For the z's, we get a negative 2 power from 4 minus 6. 22, when powers go to powers, we multiply the powers, so 6 times 3 is an 18. For 23, the 4 we're going to do to the second power, because the 4 is a coefficient. We just do basic math there, 4 to the second is 16. The x, we're going to multiply powers, 1 times 2 is 2. For the y's, 5 times 2 is 10. For the z's, 4 times 2 is 8. Scientific notation, you need to create a number by moving a decimal to be between 1 and 10. So we'd like the decimal to go right here. We need one other number and then the decimal. So 6.7, it's always times 10, and then we have to count. The decimal was at the end, and we just moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spaces, so the power there is a 7. 25, same kind of thing. 4.56 is the number between 1 and 10 we can make by relocating the decimal. The power this time is a negative power because we moved the other way. If it's a .000 kind of number, it always has a negative power for scientific notation. Negative 7 because we moved 7 slots. 26 is just like 19. 3 times 2 is 6. Those are normal coefficient kind of numbers. Keep the 10 the same, that's a base, never change the base. And add the powers on the bases. 5 plus 2 is up to 7. 27 is a lot like 21. The only difference is for scientific notation, you have to have decimal numbers from 1 to 10. So 18 dividing 30 on your calculator will create a 0.6. Subtract the powers. 7 minus 3 is 4, and that's almost right. Issue being, the decimal number we make has to be between 1 and 10. So this needs to go up to be a 6. And to pay for that, this has to go down. So if you go down from 4, it'll go down to 3. 28, you just have to distribute and combine like terms. And I have the details there on the paper of what it looks like when you distribute, and then you just combine like terms. When you combine like terms there, you don't change the powers. They stay x3s and x2s and things like that. If you need more help, email me, we'll work it out. Next video will go from 29 to the end.